Welcome to the Shabby Detective, yet another Columbo podcast. I'm your host, Mike White, and me, of course, is Mr. Chris Dashew.
I'm your hairy teddy bear. Under the greatest line ever delivered by one Martin Sheen. I'm your hairy little teddy bear.
On this episode, we are talking about the first episode of Season 3 of Columbo, number 18 in the series, apparently. It dropped September 23rd, 1973. It is called Lovely but Lethal. It is the only episode that was directed by Jeannot Zwark. Yes, we had Steven Spielberg, the director of Jaws 1, direct an episode in the first season. Now we're back with Jeannot Zwark. He is the director of Jaws 2. Well, the second director. There was also John Hancock on that one. And he is here directing a teleplay by Jackson Gillis. We've got Vera Miles in here as Vivica Scott. She is a makeup, what would you say? Like, she's an entrepreneur. She
Mary
owns
Kay.
This, yeah, she just owns this whole thing.
Estee Lauder.
And she is surrounded by a bunch of incompetent nincompoops.
Men who want to have sex with her. That's the other thing. There's a very weird undertone of sexuality in this episode that a lot of we haven't had this yet. In a lot of ways, and it's very interesting to see this kind of character on the show. But yeah, she's like a Mary Kay type, I guess.
I was thinking that, so spoilers for this episode, Sean Barbara Allen plays her kind of undercover agent who has infiltrated Vincent Price's rival makeup empire. I thought for sure that she was going to kill Sean Barbara Allen, and Sean Barbara Allen was going to be possessed by the spirit of Cat. Like we're talking Catwoman here. We're talking that Vera Miles is very much the Sharon Stone of this universe. But yeah, everybody does want to have sex with her. Men, women. They both end up dead, though. I don't think Vincent Price wants to have sex with her, so I think that's the only reason why he survives this episode.
Vincent Price is in this episode, sure.
Barely.
But not a lot. Yeah, but not a lot. He is the least in this episode of anyone like this has been in the show so far. In terms of, like, not someone who dies, because like you mentioned, he doesn't die. He's billed enough and he's high enough profile that you would think he's going to be in this more than he is, but nope, he really isn't in this at all. What a shame, because when he is, it actually kind of picks up. But I would say the issue with this one is, even though it's 70 minutes, man, it's kind of a slog in places. And the actual events of the episode and the narrative, I didn't particularly find it super compelling either.
Columbo should have figured this out, and I think he does figure it out very early on.
In the first scene.
As soon as he says to her, because there's a clue about a bunch of numbers and doodles that were done on the back of like a TV guide, as soon as he finds out that she applies her beauty mark with an eyebrow pencil, a brown eyebrow pencil, and that's the same thing that was used to write down these numbers and this doodles. That's it. That's the nail in the coffin, because by that time he already has so many other clues. I mean, the whole thing hinging on poison ivy doesn't make a lot of sense. It's not that compelling. Like, she could have picked up that poison ivy when she shook hands with him. It doesn't matter that much. I mean, I'm glad that George, his brother-in-law, is back and happens to, tip him off about that. That's great. But yeah, it just didn't really do a whole lot for me.
So what's interesting is you have Martin Sheen, and he's this scientist that had a relationship with her, and now he's going to sell this wrinkle-removing cream to Vincent Price. Okay, I will agree, and I'm sure you would as well. Good setup. Interesting setup.
Corporate espionage, always a fun thing.
But then they just kind of fuck it up from the get-go. Because, again, Vera Miles is fine. She's fine. She's the best part of the episode that isn't Columbo. A, Columbo not in this enough. B, Vera Miles is in this so much that by the end of it, I am kind of sick of her. And because her shtick kind of gets old. And by kind of, I mean, it does get old rather quickly. Because again, while yes, she is good looking and she is a beautiful woman, I always have an issue with these kinds of stories where it's like, she's so beautiful, men will throw themselves at her feet and lose all thought and logic and reason. That's fine, but it's not particularly exciting because they always go the same places with it. They have the one guy who says, no, I don't want to do this anymore. And then they have the other guy who's enabling it. And there you go. I mean, there's those characters show up in the story, and one of them is the character that gets murdered. So for me, it's just the setup is interesting, but I don't think that this kind of setup really has a lot of legs to it ultimately, or in terms of at least doing something that hasn't been done before, that doesn't just feel like, oh yes, another retread of this same idea again.
So did you catch the guy who was in Woman Under the Influence?
What do you mean?
So there was a person that was in Woman Under the Influence. I said last time that we talked, hey, there's a guy that, I said Gina Rollins shows up in a Columbo episode, and then I said there's somebody else who's going to show up in a Columbo episode, but I'm not going to tell you who it is. Did you recognize?
I must have missed him.
It's funny because I was thinking of another episode where Fred Draper shows up, but Fred Draper is one of the very first people we see in this episode. He is Dr. Murchison, the old drunk surgeon.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that was Gina Rollins' dad. The one, won't you say something, Dad? Won't you say something? And he never says anything. That's the dude.
Oh, my God. Wow. Okay. Yeah, boy. Okay. Well, that's the thing. Like, he was Woman Under the Influence. He was so, I mean, he played that role perfectly there. And I mean, here it's like, what this is it's not that it's not good. It's just, I saw him do something better in something else.
The whole irony of, he actually did create a miracle, but then it was ruined by Martin Sheen. I was like, okay, that's kind of a cool thing, but they never really get him back on track. I mean, he becomes a drunk pretty early in the episode. I mean, his hands are shaking when he's scraping those cells, so I'm guessing he's got like the DTs or something. And she goes to a fat farm. Vera Miles goes to a fat farm, but really, I mean, she doesn't really need it, but she goes there. And then next thing you know, we see the doctor there. So I guess it's just like a rehab place or something as well. And they have him on that exercise bike, and he's being tortured by having to exercise, tortured in quotes. It's not literal torture for this poor guy.
Yeah, I found the fat farm part of the episode strange. Like, because again, like, all of a sudden we're just at this like fat farm getaway retreat. And it doesn't factor into anything really. Like, it's just like a change of scenery is what it feels like. So much of this episode hinges on the first interaction that Columbo has with her. It's all about the microscope and nothing else. Nothing else. And it almost makes everything that comes after the beginning couple scenes and then the book ended at the end when they go back and he's talking to her about the poison ivy. It all feels so inconsequential. Because they're like, Columbo knows so early on that I don't even understand why the episode takes so long to spin its wheels.
Yeah, it's a real shame because relationship between those two, between Vera Miles and Peter Falk, I'm just like, oh, yeah, this is pretty good. This is pretty compelling. The relationship between her and Martin Sheen, the relationship between her and her secretary or the Vincent Price's secretary, her agent. I love that. And like, I literally think that there is, I mean, cause if you watch that first scene that the agent is in, that Barbara Allen is in, she is just staring at Vera Miles with this real puppy dog look. So I was not kidding around when I said that everybody wants to sleep with Vera Miles, because I really think that there's an undercurrent in this episode that they just don't explore.
Well, I mean, Columbo says it himself when he meets her for the first time. He's like, I see you every day when I'm in my bathroom. Because, I mean, again, because she is the face of these products, I guess. Like, that's the thing I didn't understand. She's like the face of the products, too, on top of being the person who sells them, which, like, that felt like, I don't know, that felt like a little bit of a double dip for me. kind of wish it had been, I guess what I kind of wish had happened was the person in charge of the company had been the one killing the cosmetic queen, like the model. Maybe you could then have like Martin Sheen be working with one of the two. So you separate the character of Vera Miles into two characters. Because again, like it feels in and of itself like a double dip, because she is both the face of the company, literally, but also the head of the company, actually. So it was just kind of strange to me, because again, like it felt like two characters mashed into one, and I really never got a sense of what the hell she does at this company.
Yeah, because you don't see the packaging. That would have helped. And the whole idea, I mean, I really don't want to keep going back to Catwoman, but the whole thing of Sharon Stone playing basically the exact same character, but hey, I'm getting old, I'm getting forced out, I'm starting to get wrinkles now. I kind of wish that had played some sort of factor, and maybe Martin Sheen rejected her because he said that she was old and wrinkled, and maybe that becomes part of the motivation for her to kill him. Not just that he has the formula in his head and won't give it to her. I'd like it if there was a little bit more of a personal insult involved as well.
Well, and that's the other thing. I mean, that scene between Vera Miles and Martin Sheen at the beginning, it's so that I don't know, like he goes, he's like baiting her in and baiting her in and baiting her in, and he's like, never mind, this is where I've always wanted you. And it's like I don't understand, like, no, in no universe would a real human being do that and not expect to get fucking murdered. like Martin Sheen turns away for 2 seconds and gets clocked over the head with a microscope and is dead. Enjoy their interaction, but I feel like so much of this episode just feels like I've seen this before elsewhere. And it wasn't that it was done worse or better here. It's just, it's not, I don't know, even with a Martin Sheen and a Vera Miles having a pretty good tit for tat back and forth, kind of being catty with each other. That's one scene. There's another hour of this. And it's just Vera Miles just kind of going, I'm going to outsmart Columbo, but I never feel like she's ever 5 steps ahead of him. I feel like she's caught. Like you said, she's caught from so early on. It's like, you're just murdering people that don't need to die for no reason. Like, I don't know. It's Columbo kind of feels culpable for the murder of Barbara Allen in a way. Because like, if he knew from the get-go, he could have stopped her.
I found it also kind of strange because with Jeannot's work in the director's chair,
shout out to our friend Father Malone on Midnight Viewing for how many times we've had to talk about Jeannot's work.
Jeannot's work at this exact same time was doing Night Gallery episodes, was super involved in that, and they knew that, and they're like, oh, hey, we've got Jeannot's work, this director from Night Gallery, we've got Vera Miles from Psycho, we have Vincent Price, the master of horror, so when they open this episode, the music is horror music, the lighting is very moody, I mean, especially a lot of greens and stuff in that operating theater, and it's shot like it's a horror movie. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of cool.
Frankenstein. They say Frankenstein.
They do say Frankenstein, yeah. And at one point she says, I wouldn't hurt a fly. And I was like, oh, that's very Norman Bates of you. Okay, that's kind of cool. That's a nice little subtle reference in there.
They don't do anything with it.
No, they just drop it. They drop it right after that first scene. I'm like, oh, I thought we were going to get a completely differently shot episode of Columbo to kick off our 3rd season.
What if it was, instead of a makeup company, what if it was like a Halloween company, like a Halloween mask company or something like that? Like, so I don't know, like, again, lean into it. Jesus Christ. Like, you have Vincent. Yeah, I mean, something more than just Vera Miles telling a bunch of people in red, sweatpants to, get at it harder. Come on. Like, okay, come on, guys. Like, I will say, though, Jeannot's work's direction, more or less like every other time we've talked about Jeannot's work, perfectly fine.
Very capable. I mean, there's nothing in here where I'm like, oh, I wouldn't have done that like this. I mean, when you look at that scene we were talking about with Vera Miles and Martin Sheen, I mean, there's a lot of setups in that scene and a lot of great close-ups of these actors. We put it all together very well. It was a very compelling scene.
I think maybe the biggest shame of all with this episode is how little Martin Sheen is in it, because he dies right at the beginning.
And he is so Willard from Apocalypse Now in this, the way that he is so toned down and just, very, very relaxed in this role. And his voice is so, Saigon shit.
His energy, I really like his energy. It is restrained menace. Like, because he's menacing her in that scene, like big time. But like the daggers that she's staring back at him, I mean, like she can hold her own. I mean, obviously she ends up fucking murdering him, so duh. But no, look, I love a good young Martin Sheen, and he's, proper young with the full head of like brown hair, looking like another version of himself, 20 years later with his son Charlie. I mean, he looks so much like Charlie Sheen when it's young Martin Sheen. Like, and but I really like Martin Sheen a lot, and yeah, his voice is just. I always think of an oddly specific thing, DK eyewitness videos, and he narrated them, but I don't know, like. Feel like Martin Sheen is kind of an underrated like voice narrator. Like he hasn't done a lot recently, but there was a stretch there where he was like the go-to person for documentaries, especially like a certain kind of documentary too. Especially once he got done with The West Wing.
Yeah, I want to say that he narrated a documentary that was put out recently about nuclear testing, and what was that called? Downwind? I want to say he was the VO for that one.
Interesting.
It was perfect. It was perfect for him. And I was very excited when he came on and started narrating it. And it was a great, great documentary as well, which was really nice. I mean, especially now when you look at stuff like Oppenheimer and you're like, oh, here's stuff that you're not going to see in Oppenheimer, stuff that is still affecting people right now. I mean, I interviewed the director of that doc, and I think he was saying that there were like 900 and some tests that have been done in the U.S. I can't remember how many of those were underground, but a lot of them were above ground. So all the people that, live downwind from them, and usually Native Americans and people of quote unquote lesser status. So who cares if they get sick, right?
But what if John Wayne gets sick?
Then there's a problem. I think that there was that documentary came out last year, but I think it's now like starting to kind of get around more. And I want to say that there has actually been a bill passed since then. And I wouldn't be surprised if this doc had a little bit of effect to that.
Huh. Well, I mean, again, everybody always talks about other people doing narration like James Earl Jones, or, I mean, there's a lot of other
Freeman.
People. Yeah. Martin Sheen for me holds a very special place in my heart as a voice talent. And yeah, I mean, he's in plenty of stuff, and he gave us Charlie and Emilio. I mean, really.
Yeah. Thank goodness it didn't give us Joe.
Joe Sheen?
Yeah, Joe Estevez.
Joe Estevez?
Brother. Yeah. It's one of those.
Is that not one of his?
That's his brother. So, not his child. Yeah.
I didn't even know that there was a Joe Estevez.
Yeah, he's one of those guys like Patrick Swayze's brother, or Frank Stallone, or there's so many like almost their brothers. Then you get to somebody like a Bo and Jeff Bridges, and you're like, oh wow, these guys are both really good. One definitely gets a lot more work, but it's like, holy shit. And then
love Bo Bridges, right? Like, Bo Bridges is underrated actor. No, I think it's interesting because I'm assuming, because you haven't said anything to the contrary, Martin Sheen does not show back up in this show.
No, unfortunately, he does not. Which
shame, because he could have gone toe to toe with Columbo easily. And I would have loved to have seen that. And the thing is, it's not like Vera Miles isn't good in this episode. She is. I'm just merely saying I would like to have seen Martin Sheen and Columbo square off. Or, I mean, even, God, come on, episode, even Vincent Price and Columbo square off. Like, Vincent Price is not a adversary of Columbo. He is very much trying to help Columbo put the fucking nail in this woman's coffin. Because that is the other thing I will say. This is one of the characters, and we see him every now and then, that like truly does deserve to be in jail. Like like locked the fuck up, key thrown away, and for a multitude of reasons. But yeah, no, like Vera Miles plays a thoroughly dislikable character too. But that, I think that works in the episode's favor because she does not end up getting lost in the shuffle. She stands out. It's just there's just too much of it.
There are a lot of people in this episode that will show up and continue to show up. So like Fred Draper is one of them. Our old friend Bruce Kirby is back here as lab attendant Doug, who just likes to complain while he's emptying out garbage cans and just throwing out so much exposition. It's wild.
Yeah, the amount of exposition that is coming out of his mouth is just like, okay, Basil, calm down.
It was nice to see him in this. I always like when he shows up. Eventually, his son, Bruno's going to show up in an episode, and I can't wait for us to talk about that one. I think that's a couple seasons away, but it's worth the wait.
I mean, he doesn't go toe-to-toe with Columbo. I mean, Bruce Kirby could have gone toe-to-toe with Columbo.
Oh, yeah.
I think ultimately what's the most interesting thing about the interactions that Columbo has in this episode are it doesn't, like, other than the maybe my favorite thing in this entire episode, him and that goddamn egg.
Yeah. I love the egg.
There's just not enough of that kind of stuff in this episode. Everything that Columbo's doing feels very just Columbo doing the huge.
Yeah, he doesn't bring a lot to the game this time. I mean, we get the little mention of George and the slides and all that. And apparently he was supposed to be more enamored with her, very much like he was with the starlet from the last season, the one who buried her dead husband under the fountain. But that didn't really come through. And during my research, I also read that there was a scene that was supposed to be in here of when Vera Miles is at Martin Sheen's place, Vincent Price shows up and he's there to give money to Martin Sheen. And eventually, I can't remember if he just leaves or if he hears something inside or what happens, but they cut that whole scene out. So that's the whole thing with the check, because they talk about he had this big check and then he just redeposited the money. So you hear about the aftermath of it, but you don't actually get to see him wanting to pay off Martin Sheen to get the formula. Again, it's like, come on, give me more Vincent Price. This episode needs a lot more of him.
And what's interesting is, if you go and look at the episode lengths, some are 70 minutes, some are 92. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason. This could have used a second pass. And yeah, I read the same thing about some of those scenes. It's like, you cut scene with Vincent Price out. Like, there ain't enough as it is. There's not enough of the things that are interesting. There's just a lot of what I would consider to be the things we've seen before. And the thing that's nice about Columbo is, for the most part, because it is so every week is something different, they can throw you into a different scenario entirely. This one just doesn't feel as unique as I was expecting it to, and it doesn't feel like they've put their best foot forward. This is the third season's first episode.
Well, even when it comes to the poison ivy, I don't know if they necessarily go into why Martin Sheen would have poison ivy on the slide. Like, I understand as far as some of the properties of poison ivy and how it interacts with the skin, and maybe you can turn that into something that delivers a mechanism. Like, there's science behind why it's poison ivy, but we don't really get that. And we don't get the science of this kind of stuff. Like, we even see this miracle formula that Barbara Allen puts onto that random maid near the beginning, and we see, I thought that was kind of a nice effect, how they put wrinkles on her and then just took the wrinkles away with, just removed the makeup. That was kind of nice. But give me more of that stuff. Like, I would love to have more of the actual science and things, and more of science being the thing that, Columbo, the doofus Columbo, as he portrays, is able to figure all this stuff out with science or something, because he's really not that dumb.
Well, and, again, like, yeah, the idea of Columbo being a complete ding dong, like, obviously it's going to keep coming up. But honestly, like, and this is the thing I think about when we talk about this show, like, would she actually go to jail for this? Like, I don't think so. Because of what you said, like, she could just have an attorney be like, you shook Columbo's hand. There you go. And he has poison ivy. So it can't be determined who had poison ivy first. So There you go. Like, I don't know, like this, there are episodes of this show that it feels like, unless they go, it was me, like Ross Martin, it's a lot harder for me to be convinced that, oh yeah, by the way, like this is enough to get them to be thrown in jail. I feel like this episode, like she probably is rich enough to get away with it.
I really wanted some sort of more of a gotcha moment, more of that Lawrence Harvey, more of that Leonard Nimoy, like, oh, you're good, Lieutenant. Oh, yeah, you know, I could just say that I got this poison ivy from shaking your hand. Ha, ha, ha. And just like, you know, you've got everything, Columbo. You've got motivation. You've got this. You've got that. But you don't have any proof. And then I would love for Columbo to bust back in at the end and be like, well, actually, and then here's the ironclad proof that it is. Because, yeah, right now it's so circumstantial. I mean, oh, yeah. Note was written with a brown eyebrow pencil. You could get that in any place, you know?
Well, and she even says, because doesn't she say, I'm a redhead and brunettes use black, and I'm a redhead, so I wouldn't use black eyeliner. But then she uses black eyeliner to put the thing on her face. Like, why would you tell him that? It's just, yeah, it's that is just as circumstantial. Like I don't know, the worst Columbo episodes are the ones where it feels like everything is circumstantial and Columbo knew from the beginning. This reminds me of the episode, I believe it was last season, where Columbo like pops out of the trunk, or he gets the guy searching the trunk.
Oh, that was one of the very earliest. That was Robert Culp in that, the one where he smacked it was very similar, smacked the lady in the face, and it was the shag carpet, and she lost her contact. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what this reminded me of. Like, it had that same level of just like, okay, sure. Like, she touched the slide and that was enough. Like, again, that's such a tenuous conclusion to get to that I have a hard time suspending disbelief that hard.
I really wanted there to be more with this special 8-sided jar that was
right.
The flour tin, and that, you know, each jar has a special, you know, assignment and all this, and all of their tests have these things. I'm like, show me more of the jars. Show me how each jar is categorized and have something hinge on that rather than it just being, oh yeah, we use these jars all the time. It's like, okay, all right. So why was it hidden in the flour tin? You know, there should have been more to that. Or look at this particular thing fits perfectly right there in the flour. And it's like, that's the gotcha moment or something.
I don't know. I honestly thought Barbara Allen's murder was going to be what got Vera Miles caught, because he's like, well, you know, I didn't know that you guys use poisons here. And she's like, well, we used to. And it's like, come on, like, we all know you're still using them or you still have them around. And like, I kind of wish that had been the moment. Like, I don't know, like there were so many opportunities, and that's kind of what it feels like with Columbo. It's like the best Columbo episodes. I'm not sitting and having this conversation with you about where could they have gotten off the highway and why did they just crash into the wall at the end. The best Columbo episodes, they complete the trip, and I'm not sitting and going, well, this is rather circumstantial, isn't it? Like, and that might seem like nitpicking, but this show in a lot of ways is a puzzle box that you are watching unfold itself. And if it's missing a step, or if they fast forward or they skip or it's obvious and it's apparent. And this episode, it's just, I don't know. This is kind of a muddled episode because there are so many opportunities to do something interesting, and they kind of just do something that, yeah, sure, poison ivy, but it doesn't even factor into the plot any other way other than, oh, there just happened to be poison ivy. I don't know. It almost feels like Deus Ex poison ivy.
Yeah, and I'm not looking for ironclad evidence, to your point.
No.
You know, it's always nice if you just have that little thing that unwinds the bigger thing, but it feels like we've got the little thing and it shouldn't unwind anything else. You've got a lot of little things that all added up together don't seem to add up to a hill of beans. Right.
Yeah, to think back to the Lawrence Harvey episode, like there had to be that moment at the end where he's like, the gotcha moment with the sound. And like, yeah, it's like, where is that here? Because it ain't the poison ivy. Like she just kind of, Charlie Brown walks away like, nah, 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 like just hangs her head and walks out of the room. Like, I find it hard to believe that this Yeah, like this character who is so repugnant throughout the episode and is just so willing to kill anyone that gets in their way is just going to, yeah, it was me all along. Most of these characters that we've seen that are the murderers do not give up that easily. Even Leonard Nimoy didn't. Like, he went all the way to the end and then some.
And he murdered that poor ex-drug user. I mean, every time the person has to murder somebody else, it should really just amp up even more. I mean, even going back to that one we were just talking about with the Requiem for a Fallen Star, the way that she pretends to kill Mel Ferrar and then actually kills the secretary, and then later on she's like adding more to the Mel Ferrar plot and stuff, and it's like, oh, okay, and we find out it's actually the old murderer is the one that gets her. But anybody here Shriner? Is anybody Shriner? I want there to be, like, once she does the thing, once she amps up and kills her agent, I mean, there should have been much more about, like, tying her agent back to her and be like, oh, you planted this woman inside of Vincent Price's company. There should have been much more consequences to that, because I don't even know if he makes that connection necessarily.
No, I don't think he does. Because she murders her, they don't have to. Because he murders her and then she put a check in her bag. Yeah, everything here just feels like you should have just done that instead. You should have just done that instead. Like any one of these, you should have just done that instead, not what you did.
I'm trying to remember which episode it was where you're talking about the importance of the setting and how you use all of these things to really take you to a different place, you know, like with Leonard Nimoy, going back to that one. The murder weapon, quote unquote, for the Will Geer character is surgery. And putting in those false sutures, those dissolvable sutures. That's great. That's a great thing. Then you get something like the Robert Culp episode where he murders Dean Stockwell dressed as an ice cream man, the Ding Dong ice cream. Football really doesn't play any sort of factor in here. These are just two guys, and one has a beef with another guy. It doesn't really matter that they're at a football thing. And really the whole thing, like, other than the game being broadcast and that being something, but when it comes down to the anniversary clock going off, it's like, okay, that really has nothing to do with football either. Same thing with this episode. I would have loved even if they just added something to it about like a running gag of Columbo and makeup, and he's trying to find his wife's colors, and, you know, is she of an autumn or a summer or something to be more makeup-y and just inside of this world.
Or have the murder weapon be a makeup, like something of makeup, like a tube of lipstick, or again, like, I don't know, like, I don't live in 1973, 74. I'm not writing this show. They were. I'm sitting here in 2023 trying to, you know, armchair quarterback something more interesting with the idea that they made. And it's like, yeah, makeup, eyeshadow, mascara, perfume, anything. You have all of this, and it's just, I'm just going to kill him with a microscope.
Right. Even just kill him with that 8-sided thing with the makeup jar. Smash him over the head with that. Maybe it cracks open. Maybe it doesn't crack open. But it's more compelling than the microscope.
Yeah, well, the microscope had the slide on it that had the poison ivy.
Right.
Deus Ex poison ivy. Yeah, the more you think about it, the more frustrating it becomes that it's just poison ivy unravels everything in a makeup episode. Look, I'm not saying in the Lawrence Harvey episode he needed to kill, Jack Crucian, right? Is that his name?
Jack Crucian, yes.
Yeah. He didn't have to kill him with a chess piece. Chess factored into that heavily. And here it's just like, we couldn't be bothered to care about the setting that we concocted this entire scenario take place in.
Even with Vincent Price, we see him at that opening fashion show. It's a fashion show. Of course they use makeup at fashion shows, but primarily it's a fashion thing. And then you see him in his office, and that's about it. Like, you don't see him doing, like, there's not a lot for these high-powered execs to be doing? Like the Fred Draper character, at least he's like scraping those skin cells and talking about science and how this is, being made, and he's trying to search for that miracle. But yeah, these people are just like going from boardroom to boardroom, or at one point Vera Miles is in that commercial shoot, and it's like, okay, that's interesting, but once that scene's over, it's right back to, I'm in my office, or my secretary couldn't keep you out of my office, Columbo. What are you doing here? There's always that moment. Columbo, what are you doing here?
And then there's the fat farm.
Yeah. Yeah. Which again, she's not fat. And she's not talking about the thing that I mentioned probably half an hour ago. I'm getting old. People want to take my job. They don't want an old person being the face of this makeup company.
Never factors into this at all.
No, it never max factors in.
Ultimately, when you have a episode set in the world of cosmetics, I'm not saying everything needs to be cosmetics, but you can't do this where it doesn't even matter that was where it was to begin with. Like, I'm assuming, just to assume, given that this show does kind of do some profession things, there will be an episode where, or at least one, maybe two or three, of chefs or people in the restaurant industry killing maybe each other or critics or other restaurateurs, something to that effect, right?
You are in for a treat, my friend.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say that, by the way you're describing it, they use the opportunity to do a good job with the setting, right?
They do one hell of a job. It's not necessarily one of my most favorite episodes, but it's got some moments. You're
remembering it quite fondly.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, and, the next episode that we talk about is all about wine. And wine plays a major factor through the entire thing from start to finish. It's lovely. I cannot wait to talk with you about Any Port in a Storm.
So this is the moment where I get to say I have already watched it, and I am also super excited to talk about it, because in a lot of ways I have had to stop myself on this episode from talking about the successes that episode does in terms of the failures of this episode. Because like you've said, where the show is set doesn't necessarily dictate the quality, but it does dictate the necessity to hew it in the direction of those things, because why set it there anyways? There are so many TV shows that are just about a bunch of cops in a precinct and the people come to them. This show is all about going to them. And so Columbo is always in these opulent settings and these big, ornate, wood and leathery offices. But then he's also in these other places where the rich and the wealthy congregate, like cosmetics or the owner's suites and stadiums and stuff. You got to do a better job using these places. Otherwise, don't do such a good job in setting them there, because it's just a little bit of a cognitive dissonance. There's a little bit of a disconnect there.
I 100% agree. I mean, don't remember this episode fondly. I didn't remember it not holding together this much, but when I finally came to this episode with a more critical eye, yeah, it just kind of falls apart as you look at it.
Well, and I watched this episode 3 times, so that maybe doesn't help, but I felt like the first time I watched it, I was like, okay, it's fine. The second time I watched it, I enjoyed it even less. And then the third time I just felt like, I was like, can we just get to the end of this? And I was hoping and trying to force myself to enjoy parts of the episode that I did not enjoy the first 2 times. But yeah, the lack of Vincent Price, I think the lack of Vincent Price honestly hurts this episode a lot more than most of the things too, because he's so good that it's like, man, couldn't we at least just get him every 20 minutes?
With somebody of the caliber of Vincent Price, he should have been the corpse. If you're
exactly,
him, kill him off. Martin Sheen is switch those 2 roles. I mean, obviously Sheen shouldn't be the president of the other makeup company, but yeah, Vera Miles kills her rival, and Martin Sheen has something to do with it. And so now she's got to deal with Martin Sheen and Sean Barbara Allen, and then kind of meander through that and try to get, she's probably going to have to murder one or the other of them.
Right.
Yeah. Something.
Yeah. Again, I want to say that this is the first time in a while, but this is, again, like we don't necessarily see a double murder in every episode. I mean, there was a double murder in the last episode. So it seems like there seem to be more double murders than not recently, but this one just feels this one falls very flat. Very flat.
Yeah, I'm looking at the rest of this season, and there's 2 in number 4, 2 in number 5, 2 in number 7. Looks like maybe 2 in number 8. So we are double murdering more than we're not here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I hope that we can get a little bit better than this on the next episode. And I know we will, but like the next episode where they have a double murder is what I mean. Because like the double murder episodes, they feel like the ones that are 50-50. Because the last double murder episode, I mean, I was not a big fan of the Martin Landau episode. Not as much as I was hoping I would be, because it has its own kind of weird problems. But yeah, no, the double murders, the second murder really should be that ratcheting tension moment, and kind of missed it this time around.
Yeah, I seem to remember liking the next double murder episode, though I loved the next episode. I mean, Any Old Port in a Storm is one of my top Columbos. That's one where if I want comfort food type of thing, that's my comfort food. Watching that episode just fires on all cylinders. It's that machine that just locks into place for me.
And I am super excited to talk about it, because like I said, I was holding myself back here because it was just on, and I was like, I was gonna leave it on. Why not? And I was like, uh-oh. I should not have done that. I should not have done that for a multitude of reasons. So I am super excited to talk about it as well.
Well, until then, Chris, what are you working on these days?
Just working on podcasts over at weirdingwaymedia.com, where you can find this show. You can find the show where we talk about Barney Miller. You can find all the things that we spend so much of our time doing for you, the listener, to entertain you, to enrich your life with the magic of Columbo and Barney Miller and random 80s, 70s, 90s, all eras of TV, movies, and everything in between. And then supernatural and paranormal stuff. You can find it at Weirding Way Media, and that's where you should be going right now. Well, after Mike says his spiel. Mike, what about you? Where can people find you?
Well, yep, same place, weirdingwaymedia.com, and I work on a little show called The Projection Booth over there, which is about movies. We talk a lot about movies. Talk about a lot about cop shows and other supernatural shows, like you said, with Night Gallery, and then we just wrapped up Twilight Zone 85 series, which lasted quite a few years, and I don't think that Night Gallery is going to take nearly as long, so we should almost start that conversation going about what we're going to do after that. So I'm pulling for maybe the Chronicle or a Special Unit 2, but I have a feeling that maybe something like the Dark Tales from the Dark Side is going to win out. So we'll find out. So
anthology series, baby. I mean, Columbo is almost an anthology series. Like, you know, it has one character, but I mean, other than that, like, I mean, there's not really a through line here with any of this, you know. I mean, murder shows kind of are. So we're firmly always watching an anthology something at Weirding Way Media. And one of the three of us, or probably two of the three or three of us are involved. So yeah, lots of anthology and cop shows. It's a weird mix.